Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Ash. Today, I am joined by two really smart, courageous women who are here to talk about what are issues women are facing to be political and community leaders. What are women facing in the workforce and how to just grow stronger community here in the East Bay. I am joined by Councilwoman and former Mayor of Pinole, Maureen Toms, who will become our first repeat guest in 80 plus episodes. Thank you, Maureen. And Sonia Bustamante, who is the Chief of Staff to Contra Costa Supervisor John Gioia. Thank you, ladies, for being here. I appreciate it. Maureen, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background in your career trajectory that's led you to where you are today.
Thank you, Jared. I have been a land use planner for 34 years, and just a few weeks ago, I retired from Contra Costa County Department of Conservation and Development after 32 years with Contra Costa County full time. And I've served on the Pinole City Council. In 2024, I was the mayor of Pinole, and I've always been involved in the community. I spent a long time on the Pinole City Planning Commission before joining the council.
I'm currently Chief of Staff for Supervisor Gioia. I've been in county government now for almost 12 years. Before that, I was a labor organizer with the Hotel Workers Union, and then I did political work in the Central Valley, which is where I'm from, to more of a positive environment for labor unions and political issues related to and supporting workers in the Central Valley. From there, I entered county government. I just saw the opportunity to be where the policy decisions are being made. And I really like the idea that I get to work on policy issues that directly impact my community where I live. It's been a great fit.
I'm coming to this key topic with interest as a husband and the father of three girls, 10 and under, because I want to make sure we give them every opportunity possible, which I know that both of you believe in strongly. My first question is, we talk about the need to get more women and more younger women involved in politics and community in the boardrooms. Talk about how do we get more people engaged in at the table?
Younger women, especially if they're new moms or have younger families, have a lot of responsibility. They're having to juggle a lot with, especially if they're in the workforce and parenting children and all of the activities involved there, that really there needs to be support in with childcare and after school activities and balance. It's important to be there for your children, for your boss, and for your community. Doing the volunteer work for the community is always going to be the last thing because those other two are very important. Making sure that there's enough balance and support is vital.
I have personal experience being a child of an elected official. While my father was elected and he went off to Sacramento, my mom was really managing all of our home life and the logistics of all of that. But what happened was there was a shift where my father was once really involved in my life and then wasn't able to be as much during some critical and we all understood that was going to take place and we all adjusted to that. And he did his best. He's a great father. But I had to make some calculations myself when I wanted to become involved in politics. How much time was I willing to miss in terms of quality time with my children? And I decided that I would put off thinking about running for an office or pursuing that just so that I could make sure that I was home for dinner every night, that I was part of bedtime, that I was involved in some volunteer opportunities in their schools. So I remember really wanting that when I was younger, and I wanted to give that to my girls. And I have two fierce little girls. I didn't think, one, that I could afford time wise. And then two, I had to make some economic calculations too. Am I going to be able to afford to do this volunteer job potentially, which is like city council, right? Is basically volunteer and not be able to afford maybe extra childcare because I'm already paying for childcare while I'm working after they're out of school or whatever. Now I'm gonna have to pay extra childcare maybe if my husband can't cover or we need support that way. I think I really have had to make those calculations. And I wonder if within our system, if we could create enough of a stipend so that women who find themselves in those situations can at least economically provide that gap for providing more support while they're gone doing civil service within our elected bodies that don't actually, they're not full-time jobs. They often don't have benefits. It is a real sacrifice. A lot of women are doing civil service just in their natural course of life, right? Advocating for their kids at school. They're going to the city council meetings because there's something happening in their neighborhood and they need to get attention to it, right? They're advocating for things, they're organizing their neighbors. So there is a lot of activism that is happening and a lot of women who are very involved politically, despite all these challenges we just laid out. The question is, though, is there a space and are we conducting our elected official business at a pace where they can actually participate in an official way by holding office?
That's a great point. And even as a husband and father, I think about that. I sit on two transit boards and it impacts my kids because one, my wife has to drive the other two kids an hour round trip to pick up the oldest one from an activity so I could sit in on this transportation committee meeting. What we've done is worked it out where I just have to be a half an hour late for those meetings. Here, what you're talking about, logistics of a family juggling through that. What are some ways that we could make that easier for people to participate?
I can tell you one thing is during COVID, we noticed that there was a lot more community participation and activism in community meetings from the public, including moms, because of Zoom. That was very convenient for the people sitting on those boards because they could pretty much take those meetings with kids in the other room. Or we had members of the public that were participating in the meetings while they were feeding their kids dinner and things like that. I am aware of some legislation that is being proposed to allow for recommending bodies to participate, have more participation via Zoom. And I think that will open the door for more women, busier women, to be at the table.
I agree. The stipends, if it's not a salaried position, to at least cover childcare or some other support during those evenings when they're away because they're not contributing to the household anymore. We step away from our household responsibilities for that time, and our family needs that extra support. Could stipends help cover to contract that out, to be able to source that out to get that extra support for the household? I think that would make a big difference that people could pay for childcare. Or is it provided at the city council meetings? I don't know. I'm sure folks can get creative. But I served on a school district advisory body for parents, and they paid for childcare at the meetings. They held it at the school. They had coloring books and art supplies and crafts and stuff, and they did that with the kids, and they had hired some certified caretakers to do that while we were in the budget meetings on the school district budget issues. That was really helpful to me because my husband works late into the night. And the night that we had those meetings, it allowed me to be able to go and actually participate and focus, not have my child running around the meeting. That was really helpful. That increased my capacity to be able to fully participate in that advisory committee.
I've definitely said to my wife, I could still pick up the kids and go to this meeting and they could try to do their homework there. She says that's never going to work. And that's a hard thing to have activities and supervision for them. That's a really cool thing if you could do it in that mass you're talking about. Let's dive into this childcare issue because Supervisor Diane Burgess, when she has been on the podcast, she talked about a lack of childcare facilities in some places in the county. And she also talked about the wages that we pay them and finding out the balance of, hey, a working professional can only afford to pay so much for their child to be in daycare where it makes sense, but you got to pay those people enough.
That is a problem, and I have a more unique problem, or I did. I have a son with a disability, and he wasn't able to go to a typical daycare despite the requirements for daycare centers to be available to people with disabilities. You do run into some issues in that area. I was able to get a specialized after school program, for instance, and that was definitely a necessity for us. It is true that the daycare providers are very low wage. It's an extremely important job to be doing, whether it's having the added support with daycare or a family member or a spouse that is able to pick up that difference. It's a juggle.
Yeah, that's right. This is an industry that is dominated by women, women fueled workforce, caring for our children in those ways. And I think what the strategy has been is, can we support those daycare businesses also to be in home, more in home daycare spaces, because we don't have a lot of real estate and buildings to build big daycare centers. What Maureen touched on made me reflect on the fact that not only are we not having enough for everybody, but then where are the considerations for the different abilities and the different needs that our children have? If I could, Jared, bring it back to what we were talking about with the city councils or the elected bodies or women in politics. Because the other thing that I was thinking about, and Maureen brought this up about Zoom, is, we have a very diverse population here in Contra Costa County. And that also requires us to not only think about what women are dealing with, but women with various backgrounds. We're not very accommodating for people who maybe aren't as comfortable with English as their first language, being able to participate in our political process. Language abilities, neurodiversity is something that is really important. And I just don't see us really intentionally creating real spaces to accommodate and bring in folks like that, to really genuinely and officially institutionally take part in our decision making processes, whether it's being able to advocate or serving on elected bodies. That's another thing I think that we really need to look at changing and incorporating into the future. That's something definitely I hope we can all take on.
And there's tech that could do it in real time to help people in ways that we couldn't do 5 years ago, even. What are some other tools out there? What are some things maybe the county or some of these cities could do, or the state of California could do to help on these child care issues and help create this? I know we talked about the per diem thing. We talked about offering childcare somehow at a meeting, but what are some other bigger levers that government can pull to help with this?
One of the things would be timing of meetings. There's the timing of meetings. If there's a more convenient time for more people to participate, that's something to think about. We always have to think about, can the public participate, but we have to also think about the people that are serving on those boards. Whether if it's something that's a meeting right at 5 or right at 6, right in that time period where people are getting their kids and it's hard to get them settled for the evening. Those are things that should be taken into consideration. I have also noticed that on various boards and committees, that when boards are setting up those committees, they will specifically ask for geographic diversity, but also diversity and I think of like the Measure X committee has a very diverse group of people. There's transportation committees that reflect on accessible transit. And so you have a lot of diversity there. So when committees are being set up, if the board setting up that committee would really create the seats for that amount of diversity. That's very helpful.
Great.
Men have a role in this too. As a dad, as a husband, my wife works. I love being engaged with where I can, not just my like many swim team jobs, but in other ways with them on a day to day basis. One is their family, but the second thing is the overall community. What message do you want to give men there?
Yeah, I'll start is that I have a very supportive spouse. That's probably the biggest benefit. When my kids were younger, my parents were able to assist as well when we had conflicts as far as time constraints. But even to this day, my husband is very supportive on juggling who's going to pick up our son, who's going to be home for him, and things like that. But we have backup. And I think that's very important, not only to have somebody in your household or extended parents or people that don't have family in the area that have trusted friends that they can count on. It's just a matter of having that kind of support. And I share my calendar, and we share our calendars within our family. So we all know what the needs are.
That's so great, Maureen. I agree. Having a good support system is key. And obviously, men would be part of that support system in the family unit. I also think that there are various levels to this, right? Women need to be part of the farmed candidates, right? Men can be part of that. They can be encouraging and mentoring women as well to be encouraged to run for office at various levels. I think that teaming up with women to advocate for these family friendly policies on how these boards, commissions, elected bodies are set up to support that, to make time and space and go at a pace where those of us with family responsibilities can be able to fully participate and juggle everything we have going on logistically and time wise and economically as well. Get some, like I said earlier, the stipends to support either supplementing for that extra childcare you're going to need that those nights that you're doing your public service, or the tutor for your kids who can sit with them on the side, but in the back of the chambers or whatever it is. But it allows people that flexibility to be able to participate. And also the policy on allowing folks on certain advisory boards to be able to participate by Zoom. I saw some people drop off of commissions and advisory boards because they could no longer be compliant with the Brown Act once COVID was over by participating via Zoom. And they had mobility issues. They just couldn't make it out to Martinez from wherever they were in the county or whatever, wherever that body was meeting, and making sure that we're creating policies for participation and authentic inclusion is would be something that we would want to team up with everyone on, right? Regardless of your gender or your interests or your party leaning. It's all about creating a better democratic process for all of us to be able to participate in.
There are people who run for office who have made it to U.S. senator or
Mhm.
governors with kids.
Yes.
How are they managing this process where so many of the rest of us are doing it? Is it because they had that family support? Was it like the husband was doing pickup while they were at the Senate hearing? Or
Yeah.
give me some insight.
Maureen, do
Yeah, I
you
don't
have,
know if
because
they had
I've talked
nanny.
to many elected officials who
Yeah.
are women. Maureen, did you want to
No,
offer
I was
some?
just so it may be an economic issue where they're in a position where they could do multiple things for their family and their community. But Sonia, did you have any other insight?
I do, because I was really afforded a very fortunate experience to be able to talk to elected women when my father was elected. And then as I became older, talk to women who are now peers of mine who are in elected office. I think women, when my father was elected or prior to that, and we even go back to Shirley Chisholm and women in the early days who were breaking barriers, they had to sacrifice time with their kids. There was no, I'm going to set boundaries and I need to be back with my family at certain times. There was none of that. But I think nowadays, as women become a larger portion, make up a larger percentage of elected office and they're we're bigger in numbers, then we can assert certain practices and policies. And one is they are getting more support. I think as our society shifts and gender roles and responsibilities around what roles we take on in the family shift and become more acceptable of men taking on domestic roles, that has shifted and helped. And also, there are some women who are economically able to afford it. Their husband maybe is the breadwinner, or they all make enough money to have that extra support at home. And I think that's really important. But we still have, I think, the highest percentage we've had historically, maybe is like 25%. Maybe we're at 30% now in Congress, maybe. That's still not close enough to be a majority, but it is much more. I think that there is more opportunity to create more support for women being in elected office now.
Living some disability, 3% women an all-time record across the country. One of the things we were talking about before we started recording was, and you alluded to it, is how can men be more present and take on some of those domestic responsibilities? And some of that goes to their employer. I remember a kindergarten Halloween parade at my daughter's elementary school. I was the only dad that was there. Then COVID hit later that year. In the future, when school went back several years later, I wasn't the only dad there were other dads that were also in the neighborhood, also had more flexible schedules. I think that's important for employers as we move back into the office to find the balance. Maureen, you've been a supervisor. If you have any thoughts on like, how do you create that balance of in person, but flexibility?
Yeah, I think COVID really there were some other things that came out of COVID that we have learned from, and one of them is learning flexibility and learning that you can still get the work done even though you're off site. And if you're working at home, you do have a little bit more flexibility where you could take your lunchtime at the same time that your child's parade is going on and still get back home and finish the day. Maybe you're working a little bit later, but you have more flexibility. And I think going back to work, it's definitely a different culture change. We've learned more priorities and learned the benefits of being flexible. When I was working, I had many young parents, a lot of young fathers that knew that the culture was that if they needed to be at a school meeting, they just need to let their supervisor know. And there's enough flexibility where if you're taking your time off for your kids versus to go on a vacation, that's how they're balancing.
I definitely think the employers have a role in this, in remaining flexible. So I think technology and how much it's provided us so many opportunities to have more flexibility with our work. And I don't know that we're taking enough advantage of that to allow for folks to really be able to juggle family life and work life and have this balance. I think the county really learned a lot during COVID. We started using technology in a way that was new for us. And I think it's shown us that we can be a lot more flexible, and working remotely doesn't necessarily equal a decrease in productivity. Our office, we've kept some flexibility. Some folks, like myself, I like coming into the office because I have my own space. I don't have to share space with my children. I can keep it how I want and it's set up for me ergonomically and all of that. But I also get some flexibility. I get to work from home at some point in the afternoon so I can pick them up and finish up work at home. And that's a great arrangement for me. And I really appreciate that my bosses allowed us to do that. And some of our other staff, some still work from home a day a week. We rotate out and all of that. We figured it out. And I think that spirit can continue and should continue throughout the private sectors. What I'm seeing right now coming from the federal government and from some of the private sectors, especially tech, which I feel like we're the leaders in hybrid remote work, are now wanting everybody to come back in to work in person the majority of the time. And I'm not sure that's going to be sustainable and work out for everybody, considering how we learned so much about creating that balance. More dads are able to be present in their kids' lives, participate in some of this stuff. They may want to seek out jobs that are going to allow them to continue doing that and not have to go back in full time.
Yesterday, I had our 5-year-old was homesick at 2:30. My wife had to get the other kids from school and do one or two things with the other two kids. And I just needed to change my calls that were scheduled after 2:30 to end then. And then as soon as she got back at 4:30, it wasn't easy because she was tired at that moment. But from 4:30 to 6, and then from 9 to 10, I had to go back to work. But I love that I got to have a catch with my daughter. I got to push her on the swing, and finding that balance is good. I do think like Meta came out and said in a recent firing of 3,000 people across the country, like, we know that you're not coming back in. And we also, I mean, they have cool tech tools to say, we know you're not at your desk as much as you're saying you're at your desk. And we know you're not, your productivity is down. Now, that's a small percentage of their overall workforce. They were probably looking to make cuts for multiple other reasons, but I get where they're trying to find that balance of flexibility, and that's hard.
It's definitely a big shift for our American economy and the way we're used to operating.
When you talk to some of those other women elected officials, we talked about how it might be economic, right? That people who have a nanny at home or might have a mom, grandma that wasn't working and that lived nearby that could take over that. There was a lot of criticism for Sheryl Sandberg. Some of the criticism was, and I think it was, if I'm going to get her name right, Melissa Meyer, who was the CEO of Yahoo. That was great, but you guys have a different set of economics than most other people in terms of you can hire a full-time nanny and build out a facility in your own office to accommodate that. But that's a top 1%. How do the rest of us find that?
It all boils down to having the support, whether or not that support comes from a supportive spouse, supportive family members. And if you don't have that, then you need to have the economics to be able to afford those things. And a lot of people, most people don't have that.
Yeah. I also think that there is, in addition to supporting elected officials with supplementing that, I also think that there could be more flexibility in our spaces in general. In a chambers, for example, why couldn't we figure out how to make it so that people could show up with their children and elected officials could have their children there too, just to make things a little more family friendly? We can figure that out. I think rethinking our spaces where we conduct these important issues in business also is an option. We don't have to keep it buttoned up and sterile necessarily. You don't want these to go out of hand. You want to make sure everybody's safe and all of that. But I just think, is there more flexibility in how we utilize the spaces also where we conduct business? But in addition, I think there is some economic support that needs to take place for people to be able to supplement. I also think that there's still, even with all of that in place, it doesn't necessarily always work for some people. Some people just don't want to miss out on that time with their children, and they're going to make the decision to take political office, for example, or run or participate in a commission much later in life. And that's okay too. Everybody has choices. But I think the overall goal that we're talking, why we're having this conversation, is to make sure everybody can choose when they want to get involved. They can be supported in doing that.
What advice do you give your two young daughters, Sonia, in terms of encouraging them with confidence, encouraging them to be engaged in the community? One of the things I concentrate on a father is I don't necessarily teach my daughters about the concept of the glass ceiling because I want them to not almost realize that it's there. I know it's there. I'm not ignoring the fact that it's there, but I want them to live in a world where there is no limit to their potential in that regard.
With my girls, I have a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old. So they're very far apart and very different points in their lives. And with my 14-year-old, we definitely have more conversations about that. It's more about inoculation with me, preparing her. And these are things people might say and do when you're putting yourself out there. You got to have some resilience, preparation to not let that really impact you. You got to really be on solid ground, know who you are, and keep it moving forward, knowing that's what you're going to be doing, focused on your goals. So that's what I do with my 14-year-old. And I think we're practicing that as she's in high school in her freshman year and learning that. And she's taking some brave steps and she's doing pretty well with it so far. And so we're guiding her through that. My 4-year-old, it's been really about how do I speak to my peers and adults to advocate on what I need at this moment, right? 4-year-olds, they're trying to navigate all of these different social things happening and they're really worried about playing and eating. But I think it's how do I teach my girls how to be confident in articulating what they need and who they're going to link up with, what kind of circles, what kind of people are they going to surround themselves with, and what are the characteristics they need to look for to do that so that they have a good support system, not just from their parents and their family, but also peers, networks, mentors, how to identify those folks so that they can have a good squad on their side as they move through some of these more challenging spaces and places.
Yeah, and I think also just by being involved, you're setting an example. I know my daughter always saw me doing community work, whether it was planning commission or city council. She has always seen that. So she's learning as she's growing her own family to become involved and confident as a young woman. And then my son also having witnessed that, his partnership with his girlfriend, he's seeing that in his future relationship on the balance. And I see that those lessons have stuck with the next generation.
And
Exposure.
on last week's episode, I was talking to Yolanda Finchenko, who is with iGate Labs in Livermore. And we were talking about how a PhD who's running a incubator, but we had a whole aside on how do you encourage girls in STEM? You just have to encourage them to explore and get their hands dirty and give them the opportunity that historically they might not have been. And it goes back to the roles you're talking about, right? The men need to be more engaged. We just need to make sure that little girls, young women have the opportunity to experience STEM and experience political and community engagement opportunities.
That's right. I see, at least here in the Bay Area, a lot of programs and resources for young people to develop leadership skills and to be exposed to those opportunities, very safe spaces and situations where they learn those skills and they practice leadership and they, in various ways, build all of those skill sets so that they are confident because confidence comes with experience. And so making sure that they have those experiences in safe places where they get a lot of guidance, I think is the key.
Any final thoughts before we head out? Any advice to women? Sonia, you can wrap it up.
Yeah, I would just encourage women at any part of their growth, whether they're young high school students just starting a family, to become involved in your community and learn how to balance things and ask for support when you need it. If you realize that you're not able to participate until your kids are done with school, that's okay too. But realizing that your participation in your child's classroom or your child's swim team, even leadership positions in Little League board or swim team board or anything like that, it all matters. It all matters.
Said Maureen, I agree. I also would say there are women in your community that will support you. You may not know them yet. We'd like to meet you
Mm.
and support you. And if there are big questions in their lives that they're trying to figure out so that they can run for elected office or participate in an advisory board or commission, There are a network of women out there who would love to support and help you figure that out. And I would offer that to myself. Anyone can reach out to me and be happy to be a big supporter. I love networking with strong, smart women who want to take leadership roles in their communities. And you are exactly where you should be, and you belong exactly where you want to be.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being here and talking about this key topic. I really appreciate.
I would also like to thank my wife, Rebecca, for partnering with me on going to a lot of evening or early morning meetings.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jared.
Jared, for the invitation.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Ash, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.